What a day in Minneapolis. I'm Vinny Politan. Welcome to Closing Arguments. Great to have you with us for day one of Minnesota versus Derek Chauvin, the man accused of murdering George Floyd. And today, opening statements, some witnesses testified. And, you know, we did a lot of reporting on this case since last May. For the last 9-10 months, we've dived into so many issues. But going into today, I had one really big question. And it was focused on what on earth was the defense going to say? How were they going to explain the actions of Derek Chauvin for all that time? And we saw prosecutors give us an exact time, 9 minutes and 29 seconds, that Derek Chauvin is restraining George Floyd. Half of that time, George Floyd not responding. How do you explain that? When you've got ordinary people, citizens, the bystanders that were there that day screaming and pleading for George Floyd's life. You've got George Floyd himself saying, I can't breathe, I'm going to die. Yet police did not change what they were doing. How do you explain that? When ordinary people saw a man dying, yet police who are trained to serve and to protect had no idea what was going on. How do you explain his actions? Well, today, those same bystanders whose words were so compelling in that viral video that touched everyone around the globe, well, today the defense is now blaming those bystanders, blaming them for distracting police officers, for distracting Derek Chauvin from what was happening to George Floyd, that there was a potential impending threat that took the attention of Chauvin away from the man who was under his knee, dying. That was their explanation today, and it's my biggest moment of the day.
You will see and hear that a crowd begins to develop, watching and recording officers, initially fairly passive. As the situation went on, the crowd began to grow angry. But here's what you will also see and hear. You will see and hear the conversation between the officers behind the squad car. The crowd is not aware of what they are saying and doing. You will learn that several bystanders, including Donald Williams and Genevieve Hansen, they grew more and more and more upset with these officers. You've seen it this morning, but you will also see it from the perspective of the police officers. As the crowd grew in size, seemingly so too did their anger. And remember, there's more to the scene than just what the officers see in front of them. There are people behind them. There are people across the street. There are cars stopping, people yelling. There is a growing crowd and what officers perceive to be a threat. They're called names. You heard them this morning. Bum. They're screaming at him, causing the officers to divert their attention from the care of Mr. Floyd to the threat that was growing in front of them. You will learn that paramedics arrived on scene at 8:27 and 18 seconds, just 19 minutes after Officers King and Lane arrived, within 6 minutes of it being called a Code 3, and they did what they refer to as a load and go because of the crowd. They came, they picked up rather than attempting to resuscitate him or treat him on the scene, they loaded him into the ambulance and they drove to a location several blocks away to begin their resuscitative efforts.
I was not expecting this. I'll be honest with you. I was not expecting this. All along, I'm looking at the bystanders. This is bad news for the defense. Well, the defense trying to take those bystanders and use them to explain the actions of Derek Chauvin. Let's go straight out to Julia Janae, Court TV legal correspondent who is in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I wasn't expecting this. Was there any writing on the wall that this was going to be the explanation for the inaction by Derek Chauvin to change course during those 9 minutes and 29 seconds?
No clear indication in this case from what the defense has laid out. They've, of course, thrown everything at the wall in their filings, but hard to know that they were going to go after one of the strongest parts of the state's case, and that's the fact that these bystanders saw what was going on and were making these really emotional pleas. You know that that's what likely stood out today for these jurors in hearing that video, some of them for the first time, but this defense saying that it's those bystanders that created this chaotic situation that lengthened that time of the knee on the neck.
Yeah, I again, you know, and it may work, and it may be what distracted them. I don't know. Maybe it is the actual explanation for what happened here. We'll see as things develop. But again, my shock tonight, I cannot undersell it because they caught me blindsided. You know, I did a bunch of shows in the lead up to opening statements saying what was going to, I didn't think this was going to happen. So he mentioned a lot of things, talking about conversations that the police were having that the crowd wasn't hearing. I mean, is there more to this? Is there more evidence that the police were actually believed that they were threatened by what was happening around them?
There were some mutterings in the body cam footage between Thomas Lane and J. Alexander King. We don't have the benefit of Derek Chauvin's body camera yet, if it does exist, because his was off and underneath the squad car. So we don't know how much of his camera actually picked up things that he said. But you did hear some talking about what should we do with him? Should we try to use the hobble restraint? Things that they were doing that perhaps the bystanders didn't know would have been other options. Also, the fact that J. Alexander King did eventually check George Floyd's pulse, but that didn't happen until after those bystanders were demanding it from the sidewalk.
And there was also talk about, okay, it's not just the people in front that we have seen for all these months, you know, from Tutow's camera, from the other cameras. He said there were people behind them. I mean, have we seen that video yet? Is there any video of people behind them? And how do we have any idea how close people got to the scene where the officers and George Floyd are?
That was the new video that we saw today. We actually saw a lot of new video that hadn't really been publicly released or circulated. And there was a woman who took the stand today, Alicia Olivier, who was working at the Speedway gas station across the street, and she started filming from behind the officers. There was also street camera footage that was shown to the jury today that also got that back shot. So you really are seeing bystanders filming them from the front, but then also a bystander that we've heard from today who was looking at them from the other side. She wasn't having that interaction like you see with Genevieve Hansen and Donna Williams, but she also was making those demands from her own perspective to whoever she was narrating her video for.
All right, Julie Janae, stay with us. I want to introduce some other special guests that we have with us tonight. Civil rights attorney, former Court TV anchor, my co-anchor, my friend Lisa Bloom is with us. Also, retired municipal court judge, the Honorable Lynn Toller is with us as well. You know her from TV for many, many years. Great to have everyone here. Great to see you again. Lisa, what do you think of the defense taking what I always thought were the worst part of their case, these bystanders who were witnessing all of this, and trying to turn that into the explanation for the actions of Derek Chauvin?
Well, I think it just goes to show how desperate the defense has to be. Are you kidding me? First of all, any of us who live in a city would consider that number of bystanders to be a very small number of people. What are we talking about? 10, 12 people? They weren't screaming. They weren't yelling. They were pointing out that George Floyd had become motionless and that he should get his knee off of George Floyd's neck. This is something we would want a bystander to do in any situation where somebody is being abused, as George Floyd was. So give me a break. I've heard of blaming the victim, blaming the bystander. I mean, that's a whole new level.
Judge?
I'm right with you. I'm right with you on that. Now, I have to say this for the defense counsel. He didn't have much to work with. He's got 9 minutes and 29 seconds of his client doing what he did, videotape from all different kinds of angles. But the absurdity of the argument is to say that he was distracted by people pointing to the thing he says he was distracted from. Do you know what I mean? It's like saying, I didn't see the apple because everybody was telling me there's an apple and pointing to it. It's just an absurd argument.
Okay, so, during the opening statement for prosecutors, Jerry Blackwell talked about the bystander, and there was one moment that really stuck out to me involving Chauvin and some mace. And let's take a listen first, and then we'll take a look at it.
A member of the Minneapolis Fire Department who was trained in administering first aid and emergency care. She's going to come and talk with you. Her name is Genevieve Hansen. She wanted to check his pulse. She wanted to check on Mr. Floyd's well-being. She wanted him to let up and get up. She did her best to intervene, to be able to act, to intercede on George Floyd's behalf, and you'll be able to see for yourself when she approached Mr. Chauvin on top of George Floyd with both of his knees, reached for his mace in his belt and pointed in her direction. So she couldn't help. She'll come and talk with you about that experience.
All right, Julie Janae, let's take a look at that video. This is the bystander cell video of Chauvin going for that mace. And as we take a look, I mean, to me, this is a big deal. I mean, because this was one of the bystanders who was approaching, and I guess when she sees the mace, she backs up at that time?
If you blink, you'll miss it, but it is a very animated part of the video. Genevieve Hansen is an EMT, off-duty firefighter there in Minneapolis. She's trying to tell these officers her credentials, but you see Derek Chauvin grab his mace, shake it, and then I don't know if he's pointing the mace, I won't say that, in her direction, but he's holding it up in a way that she realizes that she needs to get back, something that the state says she's going to testify about when she takes the stand.
And right there, we see it in his left hand. Judge Toller, how about that?
Not only do we see it in his left hand, we also see behind him where there's nothing but cars. So that disabuse you of the notion that, there was a gathering crowd. I think he got committed to the proposition of not being told what to do. And that was the most important thing to him. He was committed to the proposition that he was not going to be instructed by the crowd, and he allowed that to overtake everything else that he was doing.
Lisa, as I watch this video, and she's the one, she's an EMT. She works for the fire department. She's been trained in all of this, is saying that, and she's very disturbed by what she sees. Yet Chauvin wants no part of it. How does this play when she testifies? I think the jury's going to be very interested in her take on all of this.
This is so heartbreaking to watch because in the middle of all of this, of course, is George Floyd. And you see him there getting killed. You know that this ends with him dying. And here these bystanders are, thank God, speaking up for a stranger, trying to do something, as I would hope anybody would. The defense is trying to distract from what we all know is true, that, in my opinion, clearly this was a murderer. And by the way, I represent 3 Black Lives Matter protesters who were at the protests days later, and they were victims of police violence. Police violence is a major problem in this country, especially against African Americans. That's what's going on here. That's what the bystanders see. That's why they stop. That's why they take their cameras out, because this is a long, sad story in American history. And they decided they had to document it. They had to try to intervene. And thank God that they did.
Donald Williams is one of those bystanders. He testified today. He'll continue testifying tomorrow. Let's take a listen.
At the moment, I was the most vocalist person out there pleading for Floyd's life because I felt like it was definitely in the wrong. And there was at one point in time a medic came on scene and she spoke on checking pulse, what made me even go even more harder because I heard it and then I registered in it like, oh, you do need to check his pulse. Oh, he is not moving. Like, oh, you just killed this man, And so her expertise was like, look, he's fading away. You need to check his pulse. She's asking him multiple times. I'm asking him multiple times. No one checked his pulse.
Julie, today, Donald Williams, a very another interesting bystander that is there because he has a background that also became very relevant to what was happening to George Floyd.
It can give you an idea of why the defense wants to go after the bystanders, because they are some of the strongest witnesses that are going to be called to the stand. Donald Williams, having this specialized martial arts background, he was so descriptive today in telling this jury about how he felt when he was there on the scene, what he was observing through the eyes of someone who understands chokehold, giving them names like a blood choke and a shimmy motion. He said watching George Floyd die was like watching a fish in a bag, as his eyes rolled over and he was no longer moving and was lifeless. He talked about the fact that he was at the door of the Cup Foods and walked away from it, never going into the store, realizing there was bad energy, and it stopped him from even being able to go into the convenience store.
Yeah, Lisa, for me, the first time I watched the video and heard the voice of Donald Williams, that's what really stuck with me the most, because what he was seeing was so obvious to him. And he's speaking directly at times to Chauvin, yet there's no reaction other than a glare, is what he said.
Right. And this is the prosecution closing argument, I think, which is, this isn't like Chauvin, tripped and fell, and for 1 second there was a mistake and there was the knee on the neck. This was more than 9 minutes. How many seconds in each minute? How many times did bystanders tell him that what he was doing was wrong? How many times does another officer say, let's roll him over? And Chauvin says, no, we're not going to do that. He had opportunity after opportunity after opportunity to save a man's life, and he refused to take it. And that is murder.
Judge, in criminal trials, we always see defendants point the finger in other places for different reasons. Right now, it looks like the finger's going to go at the bystanders. There's going to be a cross-examination tomorrow of that man, Donald Williams. How do you think that's going to go? How aggressive do you think the defense will be with someone who was merely a bystander?
I think they will be pretty aggressive because they're in a lot of trouble. It's unfortunate for their client that witness had so much relevant information and knowledge and background about exactly what was occurring in the moment. There was no need to, call an expert witness. And I almost felt when I was first listening to him, are they qualifying him as an expert? Because he knew so much about what was happening that day that just simply elevates his ability to be a knowledgeable witness. And I think if they don't go after him, if they aren't tough on him, if they don't call him out about something or other, they're losing whatever small chance they have of muddying the picture enough to let that 9 minutes and 29 seconds not be what it is.